Happy Friday, everyone. It is Friday. It's Friday of homecoming too, isn't that? I don't know. Do graduate students still get riled up for homecoming, or are you just kind of like, eh? This is an undergraduate thing. So mixed portion. So yeah, we got so I kind of put a damper on homecoming by giving you like 3 different assignments that we're all due today. It's like, so yeah. Brett's just enthusiastically nodding his head. So how dare you? Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, but I hopefully you managed to finish them all without too much difficulty and are able to move forward. I got some good feedback on the data and analytics assignment. A lot of people were asking good questions on that, so I appreciate the efforts you put in that. And hopefully you didn't find the Alteryx too onerous, but found that more engaging, interesting. Yeah. And do you like Alteryx? All right. Oh, okay, fantastic, fantastic. All right, so that's probably something I should do a little bit more, be a little more conscientious of, is that using Alteryx a little bit earlier so that you can actually use that for data analysis. That's not good planning on my part, but it's good to hear, good to get that feedback. So, all right, so today we're going to talk about another cybersecurity incident, another data breach. So remember we talked about TJX a few weeks back, and now we're going to be talking about Target, which I told you was going to be spoiled. I think in the previous lectures, I had said Target occurred in 2012. I was a little bit off. It was 2013. So yeah, a year off. You got to remember, at my age, all the years just blend together. So you know, I've had 53 of them going on 54. So it's hard for me to keep up with all those. But yeah, this is end of 2013, and oh, it's all good. So end of 2013, and this is kind of interesting for Target. So how many of you are fairly familiar with Target? I mean, you've probably seen the ads, been to a Target before. They kind of position themselves as a direct competitor to Walmart in that market. It's low-cost retail market. I don't know how applicable that is in this day and age. Target's been struggling where Walmart's kind of been booming recently. Their market capitalization is roughly 1/10 the size of Walmart. So it's really, really hard to say that that they're a strong competitor. It'd be a little bit like you getting attacked by a squirrel and the squirrel thinking they have a fighting chance in that situation. The only reason, so you may wonder, why did Dr. Barnes come up with a squirrel as his depiction for this one? The answer is, in last year's lecture, which I was reviewing as I was getting ready for work today, I was listening to that and I was preparing for it. I had talked about how being very careful about running over a squirrel with my car, because a squirrel darted in front of me as I was on my way to work a year ago. I said, "Oh, that's just kind of an interesting analogy." Guess what happened this morning on my way to? And I don't, yeah. So there was actually 2 squirrels. There was one squirrel crossing. I was like trying to be very, very careful, and then right as I was paying attention to that squirrel, another squirrel appeared from the right, and then darted right in front of me. I don't think I hit either one of them, but it was just kind of ironic that that occurred a year distant to one another. As maybe that's karma, or maybe it's just there's a lot of squirrels in Kirksville, so maybe attributed that. But anyway, I'm getting off track there. Target is a fairly well known, fairly well recognized company. They have that kind of that promotion that they've stuck to for the past decade, I think it is. Expect more, pay less, I believe is their still their slogan. I don't shop at Target as much as I used to anymore, simply because the places I've lived do not have Targets. Although very interesting, when I went to start my PhD program, which this took place right around the time I was in the PhD program at Oklahoma State, the coordinator of the PhD program, very, very unique individual. He is very, very unique, and we're talking. Well, I won't go into detail on that, but for some reason, he had this thing that he wanted to tell new candidates and new recruits, and this was every single person who was interviewing at Oklahoma State. He's saying, "Yeah, we're eventually going to get a Target in Stillwater," and he would do that every year, and he did that the year that I recruited, which was 2009. And as of 2025, or going into 2026, they still don't have a Target in Stillwater. So, but that was his big selling point, is that we were going to get a Target in Stillwater. I'm not sure why he was so hung up about it, but apparently Target was a big deal to him. I don't know. Does anybody feel like shopping at Target is just a strict upgrade from shopping at Walmart? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there's that. There's also kind of a mystique associated with Walmart. It definitely does provide the low cost rider, but it also has a different environmental aura associated with it. So yeah, it's weird. It's weird for me whenever because I shop mostly at Hy-Vee here in Kirksville, and it's weird for me whenever I'm over at Walmart for buying one thing or another. I run across a student and say, "Oh, Dr. Barnes shops at Walmart." So it's not really. I just was here, just happened to be here for one thing or another. But yeah, you'll occasionally see me there. I know I'm rambling. My apologies. My apologies. We got plenty to talk about, so let's go ahead and go on. So we had this data breach that occurred in 2013, late 2013, and it was kind of the initial incident occurred on November 30th, 2013. And so if you followed the case, they forgot this initial incident, and just for context, Target would not be one of those organizations that we would classify as being kind of uh, negligent, I guess, in their internal control structure with respect to IT. They appeared to have really strong controls in this area. They had um, a organizational structure infrastructure that was very well pronounced and very defined in this area. They had a monitoring center. I think they had a domestic monitoring center and also a international monitoring center. And so they took controls in this area and reporting in this area very seriously. And this came up as a result of their international center reporting an issue with the information system. It was on November 30th, 2013. And to their credit, Target immediately acted right there. They disclosed all the information right away and told everybody that what was going on, and it was very transparent. Isn't that right? See, this is where I was trying to tell you have to read the case because I'm going to throw a lot of things that are wrong at you. You're going to have to make sure you pick up the one things that are wrong. That was completely, totally wrong. Okay. I completely, totally fabricated to you. Dr. Barnes lied to us. Yes, I'm lying for the purpose of education. Okay. There's no greater calling. So what happened? Basically, November 30th, they looked at it and they said, this is weird. We don't know what it is, but it's probably nothing big. So we're going to ignore it. And then another incident occurred on December 2nd, 2013. But this one they took seriously. Okay. Yeah. Everybody's shaking their heads now. Says, I don't believe anything you say, Dr. Barnes. That squirrel thing probably didn't happen. It totally did happen. Okay. It totally did happen. But yeah, the December 2nd, 2013 was kind of a similar incident. In fact, if we go back, there were these two incidences that they triggered some caution, but may not have been followed up well enough. How was the whole incident eventually revealed to happen? How did the data breach eventually get disclosed? Was it Target that even did this? No, it's the FBI, I believe, that said, "Hey, you've got a data breach. You better be aware of this." That's kind of troublesome. A data breach is taking place, and it's the FBI that has to make you aware of this. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we better take this seriously then. So then, at that point in time, I believe that was December 14th that occurred. December 4th, right around there. I don't have the date. I may not have the date exactly, but FBI made a report, and so Target then they immediately addressed the problem, and they immediately disclosed this to all stakeholders. Isn't that correct? You're never going to believe anything I say when I say, isn't that correct? Okay. So yeah, that was not correct either. They did start investigating, but they didn't make a disclosure to it. And they probably would have waited on that disclosure pretty thoroughly, except on December 15th, something pretty profound happened. There was a cybersecurity expert and a blogger. His name's Brian Krebs. And he said, you guys should probably be aware, the shoppers at Target and stakeholders at Target should be aware that Target has just suffered a massive data breach, which that probably was not good timing for Target, given that was right around the Christmas holidays, and it's just like saying, "Oh, a data breach, that's not going to affect our sales at all." Yeah. So yeah, they immediately, in response to that, said, "Okay, yeah, he's correct. We did have a mess. Isn't that correct?" That is correct, actually. I threw the "is that correct" at the end there just to see if you guys were cautious. But yeah, they did disclose it at that point in response to that, simply because it already been set out as disclosed. So yeah, then Target had a little bit of scrutiny that went into what was going on, and there was investigation that happened over the next few months. And so that is kind of what we're going to be talking about. So set stage, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the details of the Target data breach. So I had you read the case and told you to be have some scrutiny over the details. I asked you some fairly high-level conceptual questions over this. Now, this first one is kind of the first few questions are kind of my favorite questions in this area. So let's go ahead and start out. We'll move on to question 3 because first two questions, quote unquote, we're just having you read the content of the information. So question 3 says the case indicates target's investigation and not begin until after contact from the U.S. Department of Justice. I said FBI, I meant Department of Justice, obviously. Was target negligent in not proactively investigating the initial incident on November 30th, 2013, or the second incident on December 2nd, 2013? So Hannah, we're going to start with you and your group. What do you think about that? Was Target negligent? Was Target negligent in their approach to this?
That's negligent, and a possible reason and explanation for this could be alert fatigue.
What was the reason?
Alert fatigue.
Alert fatigue. What do you mean by that?
So Target had a security system in place which gave them a warning regarding any possible breach. This could mean that many warnings were probably given that were being discarded. So therefore they become used to ignoring them.
So kind of a boy who cried wolf scenario. Yeah. So if you hear the alert so many times, you begin to ignore it. Has anybody ever had a really, really touchy fire alarm going off in their house, and like it'll go off at any small thing? Like you put something in the microwave and it just a little bit of steam rises, and all of a sudden, and then eventually you begin to start to ignore it. When the house is actually on fire, you're going to sleep right through that fire alarm. Yeah. So yeah, alert fatigue, very real, something we're common, and I think that's probably a good explanation, a reasonable explanation. Did any of the groups say that Target was not negligent in this area? Could we make an argument that they were not negligent? I mean, certainly we can make an argument. That's what was the second part of this particular question, is when we move on to question 4. So let's go ahead and delve a little bit more deeply into that and see if we can understand the reason why Target may not have acted upon their initial guidance to act. So they did not report the data breach until nearly 3 weeks after the first detection of suspicious activity. Should organizations that are responsible for confidential client information have a responsibility to disclose cybersecurity incidents in a timely manner? So this one's a pretty straightforward question, and we're going to go to Tyler and his group, Tyler W, I should specify, and his group. What did your group say on this question?
We argued that organizations that handle confidential client information do have a responsibility to disclose cybersecurity incidents at a time.
Okay, so what are the arguments for that? What would you say are some arguments for that particular perspective?
We argued that it helps maintain customer trust. It allows affected individuals to take immediate action to protect themselves. In this case, they could have deactivated their credit card before any thieves had tried to use it. And it demonstrates transparency and accountability. It also aligns with, ethical business practices and legal requirements.
So you can go ahead and give your group a gold star, as you will yourself a gold star, because you are the first group that's ever hit all 3 points that I actually wanted to cover in this particular area. You hit all 3, every single one. So round of applause, good job. Okay, if you were in Tyler's group, give yourself a well-deserved pat on the back. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and review those. So Tyler mentioned customers. So it can be a little bit broader than that. I think customers are going to be our primary group that we're concerned about, but can we argue that there's a responsibility to the larger base of stakeholders to target? So when we say stakeholders, we're not referring just to customers, we're not referring just to shareholders, but anybody who might have a business interest to target. And I think we can make an argument for all stakeholders, but I do think that customers are going to be the primary group here, especially since those are the one who the data breach directly affected. Then Tyler mentioned transparency. That's something that we've talked about pretty heavily in context of accounting. That's the whole purpose of financial reporting. If we're talking about reporting of any context, we want to make sure that the information is transparent, it's visible to users, that they can make better decisions associated with that. So yeah, that's a good one. And then the final one is basically what happens if we delay? And the answer is that the problem becomes more severe. The problem could become worse. A delay could create an exacerbation of problems. And so we want to make sure that we address the problem as quickly as possible, so that we can have an effective solution and before the problem becomes worse. And so, yeah, those are the 3 that I identified, and to some degree, that's what Tyler identified as well. So I guess great minds do think alike. All right, so that's the I'm going to go with. You have to actually go with that too, Tyler, because if we come to the conclusion that I don't have a great mind, that's bad news for you. All right, so yeah, that's what we're going to argue with now. There is an argument that we could go in both directions, okay? And obviously, you know how I feel about DeSolo. I want to argue both sides of it. Can we make arguments against? And that was something that I had you argue with. So, Mary, this is a little bit more of a challenging question, but what did your group come up with for arguments against timely disclosure?
And they should also take cautious approach in doing so, because by doing this, they will prevent panic.
Good. All right. So it kind of covers what I wanted to cover at a general level. Let's break it down a little bit. I think it covers pretty much everything I wanted to cover, but I had three distinct points that I think that are relevant here. So first of all, Hannah alerted to what was it? The alarm fatigue or alert fatigue. Okay. So what would be the first thing that you'd want to do if there's a signal of a problem? You'd want to make sure that there's actually a problem. So there needs to be some investigation to determine if a problem really exists. Because if you immediately start saying, hey, there's a problem, and then no problem really exists, people are either going to be really, really upset or they're going to start ignoring you in the future. All right. So it becomes basically a increase in intensity of that particular issue. So yeah, make sure there's actually a problem, first of all. Secondly, if given the choice, would you rather have minimal disclosure or full disclosure of a particular issue? So you're trying to make a really, really important decision in your life. You're trying to say, all right, I'm trying to decide if I want to go work for this big four firm or this big four firm. You know everything about one big four firm and you knew very little about the other big four firm. What is the likelihood you're going to choose the one that you know very little about? Slim, okay? The more information you have, the better decision you can make. So we can say that having full detail to make a have full disclosure is going to be really important. And that may have been an argument why Target actually did not make the announcement as quickly as possible. They wanted to gather the information so they can make a full disclosure of all the events that occurred. So this one, the last one I want to talk about is something called signaling theory, okay? And signaling theory basically says that if you say that there's a problem, but don't share all the information associated with that, people will naturally assume the worst case scenario. Okay. So if you say there's a problem but you do not provide any detail behind it, people assume there's the worst case scenario. Do you think that's accurate? Do you think that exists in reality? All right, I'm going to use a very, very, very divisive example. I want to, first of all, clarify this to say I am not trying to provide any political perspective. I'm not trying to make any argument about one direction or another. This is just a very, very obvious scenario, okay? So is everybody familiar with the Epstein files? Has everybody heard about this, okay? This was something that was part of President Trump's agenda when he was getting elected, is that he will actually release the Epstein files upon election. Now, there's been some arguments that the Republicans do not require to do that. They're making an argument that they should not have to do that. And so now that that he's in office, he's saying there's nothing there. We don't have to release the Epstein files. What has been the argument about why he's not releasing the Epstein files? He's on the Epstein files. Now, I'm not making an argument either way. I'm not trying to say that President Trump is releasing the Epstein files. I'm not trying to make an argument that there may very well be an argument that there's nothing there. There's no information to be had. But because he made the announcement that he was going to do this and then has not done that, what has everybody naturally done? Assume the worst case scenario, okay? Now, again, just full disclosure, I'm really, really cautious when I do a political, so I'm worried that somebody is going to take a YouTube clip of what I'm saying and take it completely out of context and say, President's teaching about Epstein files. You know, it's like, no, it's a very, very timely example, a very, very obvious example of what's going on right now in day and age. It's a very clear example of signaling theory. When you send a signal, you have to be prepared to follow up on it with the full detail as necessary. So yeah, signaling theory is certainly problematic. So I think we can make an argument that there's a perspective made either way. That there's an argument for full disclosure, there's argument against full disclosure, and very good arguments both direction. So this may not be as obvious as we want to say. It may not be nearly as obvious as we want to say, but let's move on. Hold on, I want to get the names off here. Again, I'm not a cyber bully, so yeah. So question number 5 says the case indicates the data breach originated with one of Target's vendors that had access to Target systems. So what was the name of the vendor, by the way? Fazio Mechanical Services. By the way, I had a student whose last name was Fazio the first year I used this case. That was really awkward. You know, I had to make jokes the entire time because that's just who I am. All right. So, yeah, Fazio Mechanical Services. How does this revelation relate to our discussion of system and organization controls we're reporting from a few weeks ago? So the vendor was in place, and I believe they were responsible for heating and cooling services for Target. And so they were linked into Target systems, and they found out that the data breach occurred at Target. Now, Target had very good protocols in place, so to speak. I mean, there's obviously room for improvement, but the argument is that Target probably would never suffer this data breach on their own. It was through the vendor that had access to the system. And what was one of the big compelling arguments they made about Fazio's system? Did Fazio have a good information system? No, they did not have a strong information system. So they had malware protection, but what did they say about the malware protection that was in place at Fazio? Yeah, the free version, which by the way, if you ever use Malwarebytes, if you use the free version, that's probably fine for you, okay? Because you're not operating with a multi-billion-dollar company on a regular basis. So yeah, that's Malwarebytes probably should have been updated to something more powerful than the free version so they could actually detect breaches. So certainly problematic in that regard is there were not a lot of updates in there. Now, how does this relate to system organization goals? First of all, does it? Cole, what do you think?
I'd say, yeah, because the stock report might have been able to notify Target that they did have a weak information security system.
So yeah, and we talk about SOC reports. I actually had not even found out about the SOC reports. I found out this morning. There's very minimal disclosure about what happened in this incident area, and apparently Fazio did not provide a SOC report to Target for their services either before or after. They did not actually have that protocol in place. And if they had it in place, then maybe been something that Target could have pinpointed, said this is a weakness in our internal control infrastructure. We could take necessary steps to avoid problems here. But they didn't, and therefore we have an object lesson to share in AIS. Okay, so it's a net benefit because I would not have this case to talk about if Target had not suffered this breach. All right, that's the goal. Yeah. So again, the SOC report is not just a standalone thing that doesn't mean anything. The SOC report does have some context. It does have some context for decision-making purposes and for application purposes. Now, if we talk about vendor systems oftentimes will integrate with organizations' controls. And so we do want to make sure that if there's going to be integration of control infrastructure, that we understand to the degree. What do you think? Would you think this would be a financial reporting report, or do you think this is more be like a trust services criteria report? So we had the difference between SOC 1 and SOC 2, and it's going to be one of those two. Do you think it's SOC 1 or SOC 2 that we'd be most concerned about here? Probably SOC 2 is what I would think, okay? Because we're not so much concerned about the controls related to financial reporting. We're more concerned about the controls related to operations. So SOC 2 there, at minimum SOC 2 type 1, probably more likely SOC 2 type 2 is what we'd like. It really depends to the degree that that Fazio was integrated with the infrastructure. So yeah, some keywords to think about. Now, some interesting things they actually mentioned in this case. There's a statement in the case. It's not clear whether Target enforced any ongoing security reviews of its vendors to ensure compliance with security best practices. So they knew what the protocols were, what the standards were for security with organizations that in this area. Then they were holding themselves to that particular standard, but they didn't necessarily do that for their vendors, which is probably a glaring flaw given that we know about the systems integration with service organizations. So yeah, and keep in mind when we talk about the goal of SOC reporting, it's to provide assurance with interaction in external systems will not compromise the integrity of the organization and its systems. Can we make the argument that SOC or the integration of Fazio's systems did compromise Target to some degree? Yeah, I want to say to a data breach of about 40 million customers. Yeah, that would probably be a pretty big integration. Like 40 million, that's not that big a deal. We could go way higher than that. Just wait, we'll talk about higher breaches than that. All right, moving on to question number 6. All right, so in addition to the aforementioned issues with Target's vendor, the investigation team noted rampant issues in Target's IT infrastructure. So this just goes against what I just said. I talked about how Target generally took things seriously, but then the investigation team, I believe it was Verizon, the Verizon investigation team that came in, and they said, yeah, you know, you got trouble, my friends. Yeah, trouble right here in Target. Anyway, yeah. They said they looked in there and they found some problems going on with the organization. So there were a few pretty obvious examples when I wanted to do to sort through some of those. So what were some of these issues? McKenna, we'll start with your group. What was an issue that your group identified? Just one. Yeah, I know you're about to say, hey, we got a long list of these, Dr. Barnes. It's like, yeah, don't worry. We'll get to all of them. So, or at least most of them. So go ahead. Yeah, it's like we've heard that before. Weak passwords. It's like this is a recurring theme. It's like if we could just get everybody to take passwords seriously, And do we think that's first of all, that's just something we've heard recurring. I think this is like our third example of this because we talked about this with the TJX example. We talked about this in cybersecurity last week, and now we're talking about again passwords. If people would just use dynamic passwords, this would solve a big portion of the problem. Not completely fix it, but it would eliminate a very weak point. What are some arguments? What are some arguments why this is probably not something that we can rely upon very heavily? Do people want to use dynamic passwords? How many people in this room use like 15 character passwords with a combination, an equal combination of letters, numbers, uppercase and lowercase? I don't. I don't know why I'm raising my hand. Okay. I don't know. Dr. Caden, on the other hand, she likes writes a novel whenever she types in her password. Has anybody ever watched her type in her password? Yeah, it's just kind of like takes her like 30 seconds to type in her password. And if she gets it wrong, then basically you have to restart the entire day. Yeah, it's just like, yeah. So, and Dr. Caden does take this seriously. I probably should take it more seriously. I don't think anybody's going to hack my password. But yeah, we talked about this during cybersecurity. I had that graphic saying that if you've got weak passwords, that even if it's not a point of attack, it's very easy to brute force your way in. So if you know the password, it's obviously very easy, especially if there's default password. Even if they don't know the passwords, computer systems nowadays operate so quickly that guessing the passwords is just a matter of time. So yeah. So security investigation team was able to crack how many passwords? Did you have the number of that? 500,000 passwords in the target system, 500,000, which means that probably is not every single employee. That's just saying that there were multiple systems with multiple passwords, but 500,000 passwords, 86% of identified accounts to various internal systems. So basically the Verizon team said, yeah, your passwords control is pretty weak because we were able to crack 86% of them, which means that, yeah, 5 out of 6 times we're going to get access to your system. Yeah, that's not a problem. So yeah, that was a pretty obvious one and a pretty glaring one, and one that we are very familiar with. And I think that this is something that we've become very aware of, especially in the past few decades, simply because we are started relying on multi-factor authentication. And do we think multi-factor authentication is just an additional step, additional protocol, or could it be argued that we've just given up on the idea that people are going to use dynamic passwords, and so we just need to have this as kind of a backup? There may be an argument for that, especially as we start seeing greater use of this. I've got certain accounts that I can't log in ever without doing multi-factor authentication. Every single time I do a login check on certain accounts, I have to do a multi-factor authentication. They tend to be ones that are more security conscious, like my bank account, for example. If I try to log into my bank account through any computer, it's just a multi-factor authentication check, which that should be a deterrent to all of you who are going to try to take my money. Okay, don't do it. Okay, you do not have multi-factor authentication check. Now, if you steal my phone and hack that password, I guess I'm out of luck. But that's going to be like one of those Ocean's 11 type heists if you're going to have to do that. So yeah, how many people are in this classroom? Ocean 17. There we go. Yeah, actually, Barn 17. That sounds even better. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. What is another one of these issues? There were several issues that we got to identify. Let's go ahead and go back to Hannah. What is another issue that identified?
Systems using outdated software where authorization wasn't required.
Yep. So even though Target had authorized updated systems and people were going to be doing checks and individuals and organizations had access to these most update software and most update antivirus and malware items, that doesn't necessarily mean that they were being used. Has anybody ever gone through a systems update? I mean, I will tell you right now, as somebody who works in the Truman system, the system updates can be nightmarish. Last year at this time, I had an old computer. It was operating on a standard hard drive. And anytime that an update ran, my computer slowed down to the point in time, some points in time where I would click on something, it would take like 3 seconds for the mouse to actually move. And then the click would occur like 3 seconds later. It was like 6 seconds for every click I wanted to do. And it was just really, really frustrating. Fortunately, I've got a new computer now. It's not as much of an issue, but it does slow down when the updates. What is the purpose of the updates? Well, they don't trust people at Truman State. Okay. They don't trust the employees at Truman State. So they do the automatic updates for us. And I'm going to say for IT, good on them. They shouldn't trust us. We would definitely not be, we would do exactly what Target did. We would not update on a timely manner. And so we would be subject to compromise or breach. But maybe they're overacting. It's not like Truman State is ever going to be the victim of a cyber attack anytime soon. Yeah, that's certainly not going to be happening. So what do you think was the cause of the cyber attack? probably exactly the problem that happened here in Target. The Truman State cyber attack was probably due to people using lax passwords and not updating their computers when they were prompted to, not running those updates. They're saying, it's so inconvenient for me to run this update right now. It's going to take like 5 minutes out of my day. And I know that 5 minutes might stop a cyber attack, but yeah, it's 5 minutes I just don't have. So yeah, they would just not update. And yeah, I'm not going to point any fingers, but I'm going to point some outside of the School of Business or School of Business professional practice, and maybe a few inside the School of Business of professional practice. Definitely not Dr. Caden though. Definitely not Dr. Caden. Yeah. Any others that we could identify? Tyler W., what did your group think?
We said a lack of network segmentation, so you get in one point, you can access the entire system. And encrypting card information only when sent, not when scanned further.
Yeah, so a couple of there, probably one of the big ones is the basically the interaction between the systems. It wasn't even just systems within an individual store, within an individual location. The entire network was accessible through any point in the system. So they talked about accessing point of sale terminals. Once you access a single point of sale terminal, you got access to the target's network. And if you could actually do an escalation of privilege, that means that you could access things that were on the corporate infrastructure. Now, fortunately, they didn't. The hackers didn't actually get to that point. They were just accessing the systems themselves. But there was a really, really graphic example. Okay, really graphic example of this. What did the Verizon team hack into in one store to get access to the point of sale terminals in another store? The deli scale. Yeah, they hacked into the deli scale. Yeah, that's just really, really problematic. Does anybody now not want to go get any more deli meats at Target? So it's just kind of like, all right, I'd like to get a pound of ham. It says, okay, that'll require your credit card number. It's like, what? So yeah, I get it. Yeah. We should make that joke. I should see if anybody's willing to put that on TikTok and say, go to Target and say, okay, I'm going to get a pound of deli meat. It says, okay, yeah, here's my full credit card number and credit card details. I'm sure some of you need that given the Target data breach. Person behind the deli counter is going to be like, what are you talking about? Yeah, you're not going to get the reference. Actually, most people on TikTok wouldn't get the reference either, but that's okay. That's okay. As long as it makes me laugh, that's all that really matters. And then Tyler also mentioned there's no encryption of credit card information on the POS system. So this is an interesting one. Okay. So once the transmission of the credit card information took place, so transmitting it from the target systems to the store and then eventually from the store to the corporate locations, the credit card information did get encrypted, which we do know that was a danger because there was no encryption of this information in the TJX example. Now, admittedly, TJX was 7 years earlier. Encryption had come a long way in that 7-year period. But that was one of the arguments they said. They weren't encrypting the information. So anybody who could access the information being communicated could just take it and use it. And that's basically what the hackers did in the TJX scandal. And so Target was a little bit more savvy. Whenever they transmitted the information, it was definitely encrypted. But what happens if you go directly to the point of sale systems themselves? Well, that's where the credit card information was being stored before it got sent. And the storage itself was not encrypted. Storage itself was not encrypted. It was just on there as it was. By the way, has anybody ever looked at their credit card and seen what's on the credit cards nowadays? So I'm not going to show my credit card. Never mind. That's a bad idea. Yeah. Thought about it. And I thought about it. Says, this is great. This is great. I can show you an example of credit cards. Says, no, that's a bad idea. This is being recorded. So when you look at your credit card, there's obviously a number on there, which I don't want to share. But what else is on there? There's a little magnetic chip on there. What is the purpose of that magnetic chip? Yeah, it's actually an automatic encryption item for the communication. So now we actually have automatic encryption. This is one of those. This is an incident that kind of spurred that on. There was actually chips in place before the Target data breach, but this encouraged widespread adoption of this particular mechanism. So we can say that this particular incident did spur on something that was really, really important and major and significant. So there's a little bit of level of security that weren't not even aware about. So nowadays that magnetic chip, if you ever go to like Hy-Vee, this is the place that I've noticed it where they said it can't read the magnetic chip, and then eventually you do it like a few times. Says okay, just scan the card. I'm like, no, I got to use the chip. I got to encrypt my credit card information. I get very adamant about that, and then I just give up. So yeah, and at least I have not shown people my credit card information, like shown it on the internet. So yeah, that would have been a really, really argument. So yeah. I'm old and I'm debilitated, but I'm not that old and debilitated yet. At least I haven't done that. So I wonder if I'd actually pulled out my credit card and say, hey, look at my credit card. How many people would have Yeah, if there would have been a sucking in of air and everybody's like, Dr. Barnes, no, or if you all would have just let me have been hoisted by my own petard. How many people would have cautioned me about that? Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. For anybody watching the video, 0 people in the room raised their hand. 0 people. That's how much my graduate students care about my security. Yeah. Let this go on for the ages. All right. Just counting on your generation to take care of me in my debilitated states. Okay. So the case notes the target incurred substantial costs, both quantifiable and non-quantifiable, as a result of the breach. All right, so quantifiable costs were very obvious because they could determine what the losses were, but non-quantifiable, I think you misused the term non-quantifiable because usually that's going to be like reputation costs, which definitely did incur there, but they were actually able to quantify some of the reputation costs associated with it. They said they lost 1% of their 1% of their revenues over that Christmas period, over that Christmas detail, which would result in like $34 million in lost sales, which is not a small amount. I believe that was the amount. I don't remember the exact numbers, but so that was somewhat quantifiable, but there could be long-lasting effects of this that were not really as quantifiable. Now, this goes back to something that we talked about before with respect to preventive and detective controls. So what does this indicate about the relative benefits about strong cybersecurity infrastructure versus remediation of cybersecurity incidents, which is preventive versus detective and corrective? Mary, what's your group say on this one?
For cybersecurity infrastructure in place, spending that money and educating their employees is well worth it compared to how much it was spent with the breach occurred. If it should have had proper preventative procedures in place, they would have spent more money up front, but it would have been less overall than what they ended up spending incorrectly.
Yeah, and it's kind of a resonation of the same thing that we've mentioned already multiple times in this course, is that spend the money now, you won't have problems in the future. But the issue comes up is like, well, how can you quantify what those problems are? It says I can't effectively quantify it. I can give you estimates, but I can't tell you exactly how much you'll save in the problem. So, well, I'm just going to wait and see until a problem occurs. And that's the approach that many organizations take because we as humans kind of take that approach. Remember the example I gave much earlier in the semester is said, yeah, you should wait until you get deathly ill before you go see the doctor, right? Is that the approach you take? There's preventive medicine. Okay. Quit nodding your head, Brett. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we want to make sure, yeah, I was being facetious there. I was being facetious. Yeah. All right. So if that's the case, we want to make sure that we're preventive in that same regard. We want to make sure that we avoid that. Now, silly scenario, silly example. This is kind of one that will resonate. So let's just take 4 random students, and I'm not thinking of any specific students in this one. I'm just saying we'll take 4 random students from this course, and we have a hypothetical exam, which you can tell that it's hypothetical because there are no exams in this course. But one student studies 20 hours for the exam. One student studies 10 hours for the exam. Another student studies 2 hours for the exam. Another student doesn't study at all. Okay. Now, logically speaking, we should say there should be differences in performance there. There should be differences in accomplishment. And studying is a preventive control. That's where we say we're going to prevent poor performance on the exam by making sure we actually do something up front. But what if every single student got the exact same grade? Would there be some kind of an adjustment of expectations in that situation? Yeah, I think and now this would assume that all 4 of them share their grades, okay, which you probably shouldn't do that. But yeah, let's assume that there was an open distribution or open statement of grades. Like I say, this is amazing. Everybody in the class got the exact same grade, okay? It was an 85. Now, how's that person that studied 20 hours going to feel? They say, I can't believe this. I got the same grade as the person who studied 0 hours. My 20 hours of studying was a waste of time. Or how's the person studied 0 hours? They're going to reinforce that saying, well, I got the same grade as somebody who studied 20 hours. I don't need to study again ever. Are those valid approaches to this particular problem? I would argue no, is saying the whole purpose is to actually not necessarily quantify the after cost, but to quantify what the cost would be. Because we don't know what the effects are going to be. That doesn't necessarily mean that what we experience as a result is not worthwhile. So if you wanted to study to get at least a middle B, now if you were studying for 20 hours because you need 100%, you may argue that, yeah, you needed to study more and that studying 20 hours just to get a B was a waste of time. That might be an argument. But trying to compare that to another situation, that's I think that's spurious, because that's the effective equivalent of saying, well, we spent $1 million on cybersecurity infrastructure compared to this organization that spent $0. Neither one of us had a cyber attack, so this $1 million was wasted. Is that a valid approach? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that we have to actually based on the merits of what the possible upside or possible downside could be if we do not do something. All right, last question. In the lessons learned section, the case notes the incident forced Target to reevaluate its existing infrastructure and update systems and processes accordingly. Based on improvements of Target and other retailers that have taken this incident as an object lesson, can it be argued that this data breach resulted in a net positive benefit? Okay, so I want to answer this question in two parts. And I know that you didn't necessarily categorize your answer in two parts, but I do want you to think about it this way, okay? So I want you to think about this answer from the perspective of just Target. Was it a net positive benefit for just Target? And then I want you to think about what is a net positive benefit for society as a whole, okay? Which is really unfair because I'm going to ask McKenna what our group's response was, and I know that you didn't structure it that way, but how would your group say if I said just Target? Yes. First of all, what's your group answer? Was it a net positive benefit or not? You can just give me your general answer.
Right, everybody could have been net positive if you looked at it from the unit.
Okay, so that includes Target and society as a whole. So we could make an argument for net positive benefits to society as a whole. Now, I want to hold on to that because that's an interesting point. But what if we just said Target? Do you think that it was a net positive benefit for Target? I don't know that there's a right answer to this. No could actually be an argument. We could say, well, if they'd just done preventive controls in the first place, we could have avoided this whole fiasco. Now, could we argue that they're stronger now than they would have been otherwise? Maybe, okay. But net positive benefits a stretch. So there's as a very famous person named Kyle, and everybody knows who Kyle was from last time. His answer to this question was, it depends. All right. That's the good accounting answer for every single situation. It was just, it depends. So it depends. You can reach out to him, Jack, and tell him I called about in class, but he definitely gave me an it depends answer last year on this question. So yeah, I really depends on the situation. No, yes, maybe, we don't know. It's the answer. That's kind of the open-ended part. Now, the interesting question is whether or not this was a net positive benefit to society as a whole. So McKenna and her group, they made a really strong argument saying that we think that this could resonate and provide an object lesson so people could actually learn. Now, if organizations actually learn from this particular incident, can we say that this had a net positive benefit? Yeah, you notice I threw a caveat out there. If organizations actually learn from this incident. Did organizations actually learn from this incident? Some maybe, some definitely not. So remember Brian Krebs? We were talking about his reporting. A year later, he reported on Home Depot, okay? Home Depot actually had a data breach, and they're kind of in the same market as Target. They're a retailer in that area, a different area, home improvement, but still a retailer that should have identified from that. And you may say, well, you're limiting to retailer, Dr. Barnes. We could actually talk about other companies, and they probably learned from it. Okay, well, what about online retailers? Do we think any online retailers may have been affected by this? So what about Alibaba? Has everybody heard of Alibaba? Okay. So how many people have heard of Alibaba? Okay. So they're kind of Amazon, but they're like in the Chinese market. So Alibaba definitely learned from this. They've got strong cybersecurity, right? They definitely didn't suffer a cyber attack back in 2022 that had an impact similar to Target's. So Target's was 40 million customer accounts. Alibaba's was 1 billion customer accounts. So it's kind of on the same scale, right? Okay, yeah. What about other online organizations? Okay, so Facebook, do we think that Facebook has learned lessons from this? Yeah, Facebook has had a data breach every year since 2018. At least one data breach every year since 2018. Okay, yeah, so that's where it's like, well, yeah, but we all know, Dr. Barnes, that Facebook's for old fogies. None of us are on Facebook. It's just you and Dr. Caden that are on Facebook anymore. You're probably right about that. You're probably right. So what about a more stable social security or stable social media platform like LinkedIn? Is everybody on LinkedIn? You should be on LinkedIn. You're trying to develop your professional network, and you should share all of your personal and confidential information with LinkedIn because there's never been any cyber attacks there, have there? Except for the one that was in 2012 and also the one that was in 2021. Oh, it was also one last year in 2024. Okay. Yeah. But other than those, your information on LinkedIn is completely safe. What is this lesson telling us about the learning from this particular incident? Did we effectively learned our lesson from the Target data breach? I don't think so. And I'd be more comfortable if I could just spit out a whole bunch of names of the little small companies and say, yeah, but it's a small company. You don't expect them to be. But these are large companies, big players in the game, organizations that should know better. and they should have their protocols in place, and yet they don't. And that's a little bit daunting. Now, please don't take this as being an impetus to go and delete all your LinkedIn information. I do think that that's a net benefit, even if the cybersecurity concerns. But do be very, very careful when you're talking about that, because you are a stakeholder in a lot of these organizations that are now, and it's very, very difficult to avoid exposure. We are moving progressively towards a better solution. It just takes a lot of time for that to happen. And so we are at risk in that happening. But all right, with that, we are done with another week. So we'll start on, I think, data management and governance on Monday. I'll see you all then.